3 months ago, Ethiopian Orthodox Archbishop Matthias Kifli made an announcement that sent shockwaves through international Christian leadership. During a conference in Addis Ababa, he publicly challenged Western churches to explain why they have systematically excluded the Book of Enoch from their biblical canon for over 1600 years, despite its profound influence on New Testament writers and early Christian theology. Archbishop Kifli presented compelling evidence that this ancient text contains prophetic warnings specifically relevant to our current era, including detailed descriptions of end-times events, supernatural phenomena, and spiritual warfare that seem to be unfolding before our eyes in 2025. His most startling claim was that Western church leaders have deliberately suppressed this text not because it contradicts Scripture, but because it reveals uncomfortable truths about current world events and spiritual realities that many Christian institutions are unprepared to address publicly. What makes Archbishop Kifli's claims particularly significant is that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has preserved the complete Book of Enoch as canonical scripture for over 2 millennia, treating it with the same authority as Genesis, Psalms, or the Gospels. While Western Christianity rejected this text during the 4th century, Ethiopian Christians have continuously studied, preached from, and applied its teachings to their spiritual lives. This means they possess centuries of theological interpretation and practical application of Enochic prophecies that Western Christians have never accessed. According to Archbishop Kifli, recent global events have aligned so precisely with Enoch's ancient prophecies that his church feels compelled to share these insights with the broader Christian world, regardless of Western theological resistance. Today we're going to explore what the Book of Enoch actually contains, why it was excluded from most Christian Bibles, what specific prophecies seem to be manifesting in 2025, and why understanding this ancient text could be crucial for navigating the spiritual challenges of our current era. This isn't about adding to Scripture or undermining biblical authority, but about understanding a text that significantly influenced biblical writers and may contain important insights for Christians living in the last days. The Book of Enoch has been called the most important non-canonical text in existence, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why some scholars believe it may be essential reading for believers living in the end times. The Book of Enoch was written sometime between 300–100 BC, making it older than many Old Testament books and several centuries older than the New Testament. The text claims to contain the revelations given to Enoch, the 7th generation from Adam, who Genesis describes as the man who walked with God and was taken up to heaven without experiencing death. According to the book itself, Enoch received these revelations during supernatural journeys through the heavens, where he witnessed cosmic secrets, future events, and spiritual realities that were hidden from ordinary human understanding. The text contains detailed descriptions of angelic hierarchies, the origins of evil on earth, prophecies about the end times, and warnings about supernatural deceptions that would characterize the final generations before God's judgment. What's particularly remarkable about the Book of Enoch is how extensively it was quoted and referenced by New Testament writers. The Book of Jude quotes Enoch directly, referring to his prophecy about the Lord coming with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment. Jesus himself appears to reference Enochic concepts when he speaks about the sons of light, and describes end-times events that parallel Enoch's visions. The Apostle Peter's descriptions of fallen angels being kept in chains of darkness until judgment clearly reflect Enochic teachings. Paul's references to spiritual warfare against principalities and powers in heavenly places echo themes that are central to Enoch's revelations. This extensive New Testament usage suggests that early Christians viewed Enoch as a legitimate source of spiritual insight, even if they didn't necessarily consider it equal to Scripture. The Book of Enoch is actually a collection of 5 separate books, each containing different types of revelations. The first book, known as the Book of the Watchers, describes how a group of angels called Watchers descended to earth, took human wives, and produced hybrid offspring called Nephilim. These fallen angels taught humanity forbidden knowledge, including warfare, cosmetics, sorcery, and astrology, corrupting human civilization and leading to the divine judgment of the flood. This section provides far more detail about the Genesis 6 account of the sons of God taking wives from among the daughters of men than what we find in the biblical text itself. The second book, called the Book of Parables or Similitudes of Enoch, it contains 3 parables that describe the coming judgment, the nature of the Messiah, and the final destiny of the righteous and the wicked. This section includes detailed descriptions of the Son of Man that many scholars believe influenced Jesus' use of this title for himself. The parables describe cosmic battles between good and evil, the resurrection of the dead, and the establishment of God's eternal kingdom in ways that parallel and sometimes expand upon New Testament teachings. The third book, known as the Astronomical Book, contains Enoch's revelations about the movements of celestial bodies, the calendar system that God established, and the spiritual significance of astronomical events. This section has proven remarkably accurate in its astronomical observations, suggesting that Enoch had access to knowledge that was far beyond what ancient civilizations possessed through natural means. Some contemporary researchers believe this astronomical information may contain encoded prophecies about end-times events that are tied to specific celestial phenomena. The fourth book, called the Book of Dreams, contains Enoch's prophetic visions of world history from creation to the end times, presented as symbolic dreams involving animals that represent different nations and peoples. This section includes detailed prophecies about the rise and fall of various kingdoms, the persecution of God's people, and the ultimate triumph of righteousness. Many of these prophecies appear to have been fulfilled throughout history, lending credibility to the sections that describe events still future from our perspective. The fifth book, known as the Epistle of Enoch, contains moral teachings, warnings about divine judgment, and encouragement for the righteous who live during the final generation before God's kingdom is established on earth. This section emphasizes the importance of wisdom, righteousness, and faithfulness during times of great spiritual deception and persecution. It also contains specific warnings about false teachers, corrupt religious leaders, and spiritual phenomena that would characterize the end times. So why did Western Christianity exclude this influential text from the biblical canon? The primary reasons were theological and political, rather than questions about the text's authenticity or antiquity. By the 4th century AD, when the biblical canon was being formalized, church leaders were concerned about maintaining doctrinal purity and preventing the spread of what they considered dangerous ideas. The Book of Enoch's detailed descriptions of angelic beings, its complex angelology, and its vivid apocalyptic imagery were seen as potentially confusing for ordinary Christians and possibly conducive to heretical speculation. Additionally, some of Enoch's teachings seemed to conflict with emerging church doctrines about the nature of Christ, the role of angels, and the mechanics of salvation. While these conflicts were often matters of emphasis rather than direct contradiction, church leaders opted for theological simplicity over the potential complexity that including Enoch might create. There were also practical concerns about the text's length and the difficulty of copying and distributing such extensive additional material in an era when books were hand-copied and extremely expensive to produce. However, the most significant factor in Enoch's exclusion may have been political. By the 4th century, Christianity was becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire, and church leaders were increasingly concerned about maintaining social stability and imperial support. The Book of Enoch contains sharp criticisms of earthly rulers, detailed descriptions of divine judgment against corrupt governments, and prophecies about the overthrow of existing political systems. Including such material in the official biblical canon might have been seen as potentially seditious or politically dangerous for a church that was trying to establish itself within the Roman imperial system. But what specific prophecies in the Book of Enoch seem to be manifesting in 2025? The text contains numerous descriptions of end-times phenomena that bear striking resemblances to current global trends and events. Enoch describes a time when the earth shall be corrupted by the teaching of the works of the Watchers, referring to forbidden knowledge that would lead humanity away from God's design. This could be interpreted as describing our current era's unprecedented technological advancement, genetic manipulation, artificial intelligence development, and the widespread promotion of ideologies that directly contradict biblical principles. The text also prophesies about a time when the natural order shall be reversed, and children shall be born who are neither male nor female. This description seems remarkably relevant to current discussions about gender identity, transgender ideology, and the increasing cultural rejection of biological sex as a meaningful category. While ancient readers might have interpreted this as referring to physical abnormalities, contemporary readers might see parallels to current gender confusion and the deliberate blurring of sexual distinctions. Enoch describes end-times deception involving signs and wonders in the heavens that will mislead many people into following false teachers and embracing lies about spiritual reality. This prophecy could relate to current UFO phenomena, the increasing mainstream acceptance of extraterrestrial explanations for supernatural events, and the potential for advanced technology to create convincing but deceptive spiritual experiences. The text specifically warns that these heavenly signs will be used to promote false religious systems that promise spiritual enlightenment, but actually lead people away from the true God. The book also contains prophecies about environmental catastrophe, including descriptions of the earth drying up and the waters becoming bitter. While these could be interpreted symbolically, they also bear resemblances to current climate change, water pollution, and ecological destruction. Enoch connects these environmental problems directly to human moral corruption, suggesting that planetary degradation is both a consequence of sin and a sign of approaching divine judgment. Perhaps most significantly, Enoch prophesies about a time when the righteous shall be persecuted by the wicked, and truth shall be called falsehood, while lies are proclaimed as truth. This description seems remarkably relevant to current cultural dynamics, where traditional Christian values are increasingly labeled as hate speech, where biological reality is subordinated to ideological preference, and where speaking biblical truth can result in social, professional, and even legal consequences. The text describes end times religious deception in which many shall come in my name claiming to speak for God, but leading people astray with smooth words and false promises. This prophecy could apply to the current proliferation of false teachers, prosperity preachers, and religious leaders who use Christian terminology while promoting doctrines that contradict biblical truth. Enoch specifically warns about religious leaders who love money more than righteousness, and who heap up treasures for themselves while the poor suffer. Enoch also contains detailed descriptions of supernatural phenomena that will increase dramatically in the final generation, including angelic appearances, prophetic dreams and visions, and supernatural experiences that will be both genuine spiritual manifestations and demonic deceptions designed to mislead the elect. The text warns that distinguishing between authentic divine revelation and supernatural deception will become increasingly difficult as the end approaches, requiring unprecedented spiritual discernment from God's people. The book describes a time when knowledge shall increase greatly, but wisdom shall decrease. A prophecy that seems remarkably relevant to our information age, where access to data is unlimited, but practical wisdom and spiritual understanding appear to be declining. Enoch connects this knowledge explosion to human pride and the rejection of divine authority, warning that intellectual advancement without spiritual foundation leads inevitably to moral corruption and divine judgment. One of the most striking aspects of Enoch's prophecies is their emphasis on timing. The text suggests that these end times phenomena won't occur gradually over centuries, but will accelerate rapidly during the final generation. Enoch describes birth pangs that increase in frequency and intensity as divine judgment approaches, much like Jesus' own prophecies about the end times. According to Enochic calculations based on astronomical cycles and spiritual seasons, many scholars who study the text believe we may indeed be living in the final generation that the book describes. But why do many churches fear teaching from the Book of Enoch, even when they acknowledge its historical importance and influence on biblical writers? The primary concern is that the text's detailed descriptions of spiritual realities might encourage dangerous speculation about matters that God has chosen not to reveal clearly in canonical scripture. Church leaders worry that focusing too heavily on Enochic angelology, cosmic warfare, and apocalyptic imagery might distract believers from the simple gospel message and lead them into complex theological speculation that produces confusion rather than faith. There are also concerns about the text's potential to fuel conspiracy theories, end-time speculation, and unhealthy obsession with supernatural phenomena. Some church leaders fear that teaching from Enoch might encourage believers to look for signs and wonders rather than walking by faith, or to become so focused on end times events that they neglect their current responsibilities for evangelism, discipleship, and Christian living. Additionally, many churches are concerned about maintaining theological unity and avoiding controversial topics that might divide congregations or create unnecessary conflicts. Since the Book of Enoch is not universally accepted as canonical, teaching from it might create confusion about biblical authority or lead to disputes about which texts should be considered authoritative for Christian doctrine and practice. However, proponents of studying Enoch argue that these concerns, while understandable, may be preventing Christians from accessing important spiritual insights that could be crucial for navigating end times challenges. They point out that the New Testament writers clearly viewed Enoch as a legitimate source of spiritual knowledge, and that dismissing the text entirely might mean missing important prophetic warnings and spiritual preparations that God intended for the final generation. The question of whether Christians should study the Book of Enoch cannot be answered simplistically. The text is clearly not canonical scripture in the same sense as the 66 books of the Protestant Bible, and it should not be given equal authority with biblical revelation. However, its historical importance, its influence on New Testament writers, and its preservation by ancient Christian communities suggest that it deserves serious consideration as a source of spiritual insight and historical understanding. For Christians interested in studying Enoch, several important principles should guide their approach. First, the text should always be interpreted in light of canonical scripture, never in contradiction to it. Where Enochic teachings seem to conflict with clear biblical doctrine, scripture must take precedence. Second, the text should be studied for historical and spiritual insight, rather than as a source of detailed prophetic predictions about specific dates or events. Third, any application of Enochic teachings to contemporary situations should be done carefully and with appropriate humility about the limitations of human understanding. Perhaps most importantly, studying the Book of Enoch should strengthen rather than weaken one's commitment to biblical authority and the essential doctrines of Christian faith. The text's value lies not in providing alternative doctrine, but in illuminating the historical and spiritual context within which biblical revelation was given, and in providing additional perspective on spiritual realities that are also addressed in canonical scripture. The Book of Enoch's prophecies about deception, spiritual warfare, environmental catastrophe, moral corruption, and divine judgment serve primarily as confirmation of what Scripture already teaches about the end times. Where the text provides additional detail or perspective on these themes, it can enhance our understanding without contradicting biblical truth. The key is maintaining proper balance and biblical foundation while remaining open to the insights that this ancient text might provide. For believers living in what may indeed be the end times, the Book of Enoch offers both warning and encouragement. Its detailed descriptions of spiritual deception can help Christians recognize and resist false teaching. Its emphasis on righteousness and faithfulness provides motivation for holy living despite cultural pressure to compromise. Its prophecies about divine judgment remind us that God's justice will ultimately prevail over human wickedness, and its promises about the ultimate triumph of God's kingdom offer hope and perseverance during difficult times. Whether or not the specific events of 2025 fulfill Enochic prophecies in precise detail, the text's broader themes about end-time spiritual warfare, moral corruption, supernatural deception, and divine judgment are clearly relevant to our current era. Christians who understand these themes will be better prepared to navigate the spiritual challenges of our time and to remain faithful regardless of how current events unfold. The Book of Enoch ultimately points us back to the same essential truths that canonical scripture emphasizes: the reality of spiritual warfare, the importance of righteousness, the certainty of divine judgment, and the need for faith in God's ultimate victory over evil. Whether we study this ancient text or not, these fundamental principles remain crucial for Christian living in any era, but perhaps especially in times like ours, when deception is widespread and spiritual discernment is essential. As we face an uncertain future, the Book of Enoch's greatest value may be its reminder that spiritual realities are more significant than political or economic developments, that God's purposes will be accomplished regardless of human resistance, and that those who remain faithful to truth will ultimately share in his eternal victory. These are lessons worth learning, whether they come from the 66 books of the biblical canon or from ancient texts that help us understand the spiritual context within which biblical revelation was given. The question isn't whether churches should fear the Book of Enoch, but whether they should help their members understand it properly as part of the broader spiritual and historical context that shaped early Christianity. With proper biblical foundation and appropriate caution about its non-canonical status, this ancient text may indeed provide valuable insights for Christians seeking to understand our times and prepare for whatever challenges lie ahead.